Hey, it's Saul with another video. World of Warcraft Chronicles Volume 3 just came out today. Contained in this third and supposedly final volume are references to the World of Warcraft, the game itself. And this is significant because this will kind of canonize what it is that we as players had done in the World of Warcraft itself, but ultimately decide who does what. Throughout this video, I'm going to read passages from the Chronicle itself, and credit the Alliance and Horde accomplishments throughout the World of Warcraft's history. So far, at least. I'll start with this quote. "It was not the legendary heroes of past wars who rose up to fight for their world. It was the ordinary citizens of Azeroth who intervened. They began their journeys for different reasons. Some fought for adventure, or for the noble cause of justice. Some fought for vengeance and to join the war against the hated faction. Some even fought for money and looked for ways to profit from the conflicts. Still others fought for glory, so that their names would be remembered by the entire world. And some traveled alone, while others formed mighty guilds that worked together to fight against the darkness. As the years passed, these extraordinary champions would be called upon to do the impossible. Without them, Azeroth would surely have succumbed to evil." Cool. Keep in mind that the story of the lore has not been entirely written between the Horde and Alliance as to who did what. Keep your eyes and ears open for what's missing, and feel free to put in a comment below which faction should have done what. I'll be going in the order of the book, and with that we'll start with Blackrock Mountain, and the fight against the Dark Iron Dwarves. King Magni could hardly believe the rumors that his daughter had willingly married an enemy. He recruited a covert team of Alliance champions to infiltrate the Dark Iron stronghold and rescue Moira. The Alliance team cut their way through Shadowforge City until they reached the Imperial seat. The ensuing battle shook the mountain, but in the end, Emperor Dagran Tharissen was slain. Who smashed the Molten Core? It was Moira, the leader of the Dark Iron, who kind of manipulated the Alliance and Horde, along with the Hydraxian Waterlords who really helped to execute on the plan to defeat Ragnaros. She used the opportunity well. Moira quietly let out word that the Dark Iron Dwarves were being forced to create a massive army for the Fire Lord. Dagran Tharissen's death had delayed the creation of that army, but not for long. Ragnaros and his forces would only become stronger as time went on. To draw as much attention as possible, Moira made sure the rest of the world knew that there were riches and artifacts of untold power hidden deep within the mountain. She hoped that some adventurous or greedy heroes would band together to shatter Ragnaros' defenses and banish the Fire Lord back to the elemental plane. Her plan worked better than she could have ever dreamed. Before the Alliance or the Horde acted on the rumors, another force did, the Hydraxian Waterlords, elemental beings of water who are natural enemies of the fire elementals. They offered aid and rewards to anyone who would challenge Ragnaros. In Meridon, it was the Horde that laid low all the enemies of the Tauren. Thrall called on the emerging heroes of his faction to handle this disturbance and put it to rest for good. The Horde's forces quickly discovered that the various Centaur tribes were slaughtering each other just as often as they were attacking outsiders. The Horde helped suppress the other violent tribes, and then its champions turned their gaze on Meridon itself. They journeyed into the depths of the burial ground and defeated every creature inside it, including Theradris. Predictably, the Horde was also mostly involved in the Dire Maul instance. The Horde dispatched its forces to scour the Gorduni from Dire Maul. They had expected only to kill Gordok and end his reign of madness, but once they arrived, they discovered two different sources of corruption lurking in the city. The first was the Emerald Nightmare. The second source of corruption shocked those who explored Dire Maul. A secretive group of elves, the Chandrilar, were living deep in the bones of their old city. Their presence did not raise alarm at first, for they did not seem hostile. Yet when the Horde discovered that the elves had imprisoned a demon named Imulthar and were feeding on its power, there was no choice but to act. The Horde banished Imulthar to the Twisting Nether. In doing so, they cut off the elves' source of power and incurred their wrath. The Chandrilar's leader, Prince Tortheldrin, personally led the counterattack against the Horde, but he could not restore Imulthar or claim vengeance. He fell to the Horde's blades, and Dire Maul became his tomb. Not too surprisingly, it was the Horde that wiped out their enemies in Blackrock Spire, as well as Blackwing Lair. This was an effort to finally rout the quote true Horde that was plaguing their faction for some time. Some of the Horde's emergent champions traveled to the Eastern Kingdoms to settle the matter for good. Dalrend personally joined the defense of Blackrock Spire. Though he was a mighty warrior, the heroes he faced were mightier still. The self-proclaimed leader of the true Horde died in his stronghold. The rest of his followers scattered, depriving the Black Dragonflight of their protectors. Nefarian turned his wrath on the Horde intruders, but they did not flee. They cut their way through endless waves of Nefarian's twisted creations until he too fell to their strength and persistence. The Horde champions took Nefarian's head as proof of their victory, and returned to Orgrimmar as conquering heroes. As far as the citizens of Azeroth knew, the Black Dragonflight's last bastion of power had just been erased, never to return. But we know that's not entirely true. Also predictably, it was the Horde that took care of the dealings in the Wailing Caverns. After an order of druids became trapped, and some corrupted, in the cavern's depths, the Horde mounted a rescue mission, cleansing the caves of the Nightmare and saving several of the druids. On the other side, over at the Eastern Kingdoms, it was the Alliance that cleansed the Sunken Temple. A green dragon named Atharius called for help from the Cenarian Circle, and the druids sent an Alliance force to cleanse the temple. These champions slaughtered many Atali adherents and put an end to their rituals, but the ripple effects of the Nightmare had only begun. Zul'Gurub was conquered by the Horde. The battle for Zul'Gurub was costly and brutal. The Horde charged into the temple city, hacking through masses of Atali and their enslaved followers. Though they slew Jindo the Hexer, his death came too late to stop Hakar from entering the world. The Law of Blood manifested as a force of death and insanity. He poisoned the blood of some of the Horde's champions and tried to drag their thoughts into absolute madness. It was Hakar's own power that proved to be his undoing. All of the Horde invaders allowed themselves to be poisoned, and then they let the Loa feed on their corrupted blood. Hakar gorged on his prey, unaware of the poison flooding his veins until it was too late. The Law of Blood succumbed to his own magic. The survivors staggered out of the now silent city of Zul'Gurub, exhausted, weary, but victorious. As we know, the War of the Shifting Sands was a joint Horde and Alliance effort. The entire world was involved with stopping Cthulhu and all of his hordes of really gross things. Varrock wasted little time. He had no intention of letting an old god regain its footing and spawn a new army. He ordered a dual strike upon Cthulhu's forces. The first attack would raid the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj, which held the bulk of the Qiraji. Varrock knew the insectoids would show no mercy. He deployed his most elite Horde champions in this fight, believing that only they could endure such a brutal battle. While the Horde held the line against the Qiraji, the Alliance would storm beneath Ahn'Qiraj. They would not face swarms of insectoids, but they would fight Cthulhu's most powerful minions, and then they would confront the old god itself. With the Horde occupying the Qiraji army above, the Alliance soldiers descended into the maw of madness. The whispers of Cthulhu slithered into their minds, seeking to turn them against one another, and yet they succeeded. Through blade, shield, and magic, an old god was defeated. The first assault of Naxxramas was conducted by the Argent Dawn, but it was ultimately executed by the Alliance. Bolvar Foredragon recruited scores of Alliance heroes to assault Naxxramas. The twisted creatures that roamed the necropolis proved to be nearly insurmountable foes. The Alliance champions faced plague abominations, a monstrous frostworm, and the Scourge's most powerful Death Knights. Finally, they confronted Kel'Thuzad, and the Lich unleashed all his power upon them. But in the end, Kel'Thuzad fell. The Alliance had succeeded in stopping the Scourge's short-lived invasion. Though they could not destroy Naxxramas itself, none dared stay inside the fortress. It soon began drifting back to Northrend. With his last breath, Kel'Thuzad promised that he would return, more powerful than ever. They were not idle words. It was the Horde that purged pretty much all of Hellfire's Citadel. For many members of the Horde, the assault was personal. The ferocious red-skinned orcs were a reminder of the demonic corruption that had plagued the old Horde. Using the Pit Lord Magtheridon's blood, Illidan had forged an army of brutal soldiers. The infamous chieftain of the Shattered Hand Orc clan, Kargath Bladefist, lorded over Hellfire's Citadel. They showed no mercy to the Horde, and they were offered none in return. Horde forces defeated Kargath and marched into the heart of Hellfire's Citadel. They did not rest until they cut down Magtheridon in the belly of the fortress. Though Magtheridon would never again taint the orc race, and few soldiers rejoiced in spilling the blood of fell orcs. In fact, there's a bit of trade-off between the Alliance and Horde as to who does what. While the Horde took out Magtheridon, it was the Alliance that assaulted Serpent Shrine Cavern. The Alliance did not hesitate. Its champions stormed into the Naga's watery fortress, Coilfang Reservoir. Much like the Horde's attack on Magtheridon and Hellfire's Citadel, The Alliance's assault on Coilfang Reservoir exacted a heavy toll from the invaders. The stronghold was filled with diseased wildlife and Lady Vash's most fearsome Naga warriors. Enslaved Broken also roamed Coilfang Reservoir, and nearly all of them welcomed the promise of freedom. The Alliance's forces shattered their bonds as they charged through the Naga fortress. Lady Vash was the last to fall to the Alliance blades. With her death, Coilfang Reservoir was no longer a threat. Though it would take time, balance would return to Zangarmarsh. Telverdor's inhabitants were now safe to expand across the region. Just like how it was pretty personal for the Horde to wage war on the Fel Orcs over in Hellfire Citadel, the Blood Elves did the same for Tempest Keep. Kael'thas was lost. It was their duty to vanquish him and end his treachery. The Horde made war on Kael'thas and his followers. The battle spread into Tempest Keep and engulfed every corner of the dimensional fortress. It was there where the prince made his final stand. It was there where some of his own loyal subjects spilled his blood and ended his reign. And as we had already seen through cinematics and other readings, both the Horde and Alliance lay siege to the Black Temple. A unified army of Horde, Alliance, and Shattrath City's forces carved its way through the Black Temple. Some of Illivan's servants fought to the death. Some fled in terror, and others took the assault as an opportunity to turn on the betrayer. Illidan Stormrage called upon all of his power and knowledge to overcome his attackers. He fought not only to save himself, but to keep his war against the Legion alive. His conviction never faltered, but that was not enough to grant him victory. In the end, he fell. Meanwhile, over at Zul'Aman, the Horde was desperate not to fight a war on two fronts, Outland and Quel'Thalas. The faction's mightiest champions volunteered to storm Zul'Aman. They did not have the strength to face the Troll's army directly, but they had no need to. The Horde strike force cut off the Serpent's head, killing Zul'Jin and his priests before their rampage on Quel'Thalas could even begin. To defend against Kil'jaeden's invasion, both the Alliance and Horde descend upon Quel'Thalas to stop him. Liadrin directed the Horde's champions to hunt down Kael'thas in Magister's Terrace. Though the prince had grown more powerful since his defeat at Tempest Keep, so had the heroes he faced. The Horde slew Kael'thas Sunstrider and ended him once and for all. The Alliance soldiers fought with all their strength to drive Kil'jaeden back through the portal, but their efforts had little effect. In the end, it was Anvina Teague who turned the tide of battle. She sacrificed her own existence, expending what was left of her energy to weaken Kil'jaeden. It was just enough for the Alliance to finally banish the Demon Lord and close his gateway into Azeroth. Funny enough, it wasn't until the Burning Crusade expansion that we discover Onyxia's actual death. This happens at the hands of Varian Wrynn. As battle engulfed Onyxia's lair, the dragon's enchantment over Varian Wrynn crumbled. His shattered essences merged, and he was made whole again. The one true King of Stormwind brought Onyxia low and cut her head from her shoulders. With Anduin at his side, Varian returned to his throne in Stormwind. Onyxia's head was hung from the gates of the city, a warning of the fate that awaited anyone who sought to destroy the kingdom. Throughout the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, it appears that many of the major milestones and accomplishments were done by both the Horde and Alliance. Yet Kel'Thuzad had made a critical mistake. By bringing Naxxramas so close to the front lines, he had given an opening for a daring strike on the fortress itself. Champions from both the Horde and Alliance stormed into Naxxramas, tearing it apart from the inside and purging the evil from its halls. For some of these heroes, it was the second time they had assaulted this fortress, and they were more than prepared to face Kel'Thuzad again. Despite the Lich King's efforts to send reinforcements to the stronghold, Kel'Thuzad was defeated. Rumors quickly spread that his soul was lost to the Shadowlands, the realm of the dead. During the Nexus War, the Alliance and Horde teamed up with the Wyrmrest Accord, an alliance of dragons, to stop Malygos. With heavy hearts, the dragons reached an agreement that would become known as the Wyrmrest Accord. For the good of Azeroth, they would join the side of mortals and make war on Malygos. Reaching this decision was difficult for all of them, but especially for Alexstrasza. She saw Malygos as a brother, and as a guardian of life, she abhorred the bloodshed that was to come. Yet, if she did nothing, she knew the number of lives lost would be unimaginable. The united forces of the Wyrmrest Accord assaulted Malygos' stronghold in the Nexus. Alexstrasza herself was there when Azeroth's defenders faced the aspect of magic and struck him down. She felt no relief or joy in ending the life of her ancient friend, only a deep sorrow. Approaching the assault on Ulduar, the Alliance and Horde split their efforts. Members of the Alliance offered to escort Bran Bronzebeard into Ulduar to recover more of its mysteries. They infiltrated a wing of the fortress known as the Halls of Stone, home to the Forge of Wills. The Iron Shaper, one of Keeper Loken's most trusted servants, was waiting for them. He served as the master of the Forge of Wills and the architect of Yogg-Saron's Iron Army. The Alliance heroes braved countless dangers and destroyed him, denying the old god any further reinforcements. Meanwhile, the Horde did not remain idle. A handful of its greatest heroes traveled to another of Ulduar's wings, the Halls of Lightning. Loken called this corner of the fortress home, and he surrounded himself with his most ardent followers. The Horde's champions were nearly struck down when they came face to face with the fallen keeper, but their persistence paid off, and they slew him. Ultimately, it was a union of both Alliance and Horde, also teaming up with the Explorers League and the Kirin Tor, who finally laid low Yogg-Saron. When the invaders finally reached the prison of Yogg-Saron, the old god tore at their minds with visions of madness, betrayal, and suffering. Several of the heroes were lost to insanity, and the old god turned them on their former allies. Just as when they had faced Cthulhu, the mortals of Azeroth prevailed. Yogg-Saron was defeated, and its control over Ulduar vanished. After the Cataclysm and with the assault of the Twilight Cultists and Deathwing, both the Horde and Alliance effectively split off to combat all of these different threats. The same heroes who had fought in Northrend, Outland, and Ahn'Qiraj answered the Earthen Ring's call. They came from different lands. They held different beliefs. Some were even sworn enemies, yet what they shared was a common desire to protect Azeroth, their home. These heroes spearheaded missions across the world. In Deepholm, they destroyed the Twilight's Hammer presence, allowing the Earthen Ring to repair the damage caused to the realm by Deathwing's emergence into Azeroth. Campaigns in Vashj'ir and Uldum met similar success. Alliance and Horde strike forces ventured beneath the waves and broke the strength of the Naga and their allies. In Uldum, they secured the ancient Forge of Origination before the Twilight's Hammer could harness its energies. It was there that Azeroth's defenders delivered a crushing blow to N'Zoth's elemental minions. Through a gateway in Uldum, they infiltrated the lofty domain of the Skywall and vanquished Al'Akir, the Windlord. The Red Dragonflight also came to the Alliance's aid, most notably at Grim Batol. They joined forces for a unified attack on the ancient stronghold, and ripped it free from the clutches of the Twilight's Hammer. The Horde eventually struck at the cult's seat of power, the Bastion of Twilight. The stronghold's defenses crumbled before the onslaught, and the Horde's greatest champions cut their way through the citadel. They did not rest until they had plunged their blades into Cho'Gall's black heart. The two-headed ogre did not flee from his enemies. He embraced his fate. Despite the defeats he had suffered, he died believing the hour of twilight was inevitable. Oddly enough, there isn't enough to explain what happens in Blackwing Descent. During their campaign against the Twilight's Hammer cult, the Horde and the Alliance vanquished Nefarian and Syntharia, yet their creations lived on. They had both produced powerful weapons to serve the cult, particularly Syntharia. She had forged hundreds of Twilight dragons, and they became the backbone of Deathwing's army. The Cenarian Circle recruited people from both the Horde and Alliance to push back the threat coming from the Firelands. The Cenarian Circle stormed into the Firelands and carved out a stronghold known as the Molten Front. Fire elementals constantly battered Hydral's defenders, but they held fast. Reinforcements from the Horde and the Alliance soon joined the Cenarian Circle. Slowly, they pushed deeper into the Firelands until they reached Sulfuran Keep, Ragnaros' blazing citadel. Secure in his own domain, Ragnaros thought himself beyond the reach of simple mortals. Yet so had Al'Akir. Like the Windlord, Ragnaros fell before the onslaught of Azeroth's defenders. His greatest lieutenants, including Fandral Staghelm and most of the Druids of the Flame, suffered the same fate. As the pushback against the Cataclysm went on, the Horde and Alliance once again split off to complete various tasks. That meant fighting Murozond. As mighty as Nozdormu was, he feared that he would not have the strength to fight this warped future version of himself. It was through the Horde's champions that he found courage. They too believed that the Dragon Soul was the answer to ending Deathwing, and they volunteered their lives to join Nozdormu on his quest. Together, they ventured into a bleak sliver of the Timeways, a future where Murozond and his infinite dragons had twisted reality beyond all recognition. Inspired by the iron will and bravery of his mortal allies, Nozdormu helped the Horde face his shadow self and end Murozond. The dragon aspects needed the dragon soul in its purest form, not long after Deathwing had crafted it and convinced his former friends to infuse it with their energies. This time it was the heroes from the Alliance who rose to the challenge. Alongside Nozdormu, they ventured into the broken battlefields of the past. Demons swarmed across a land smoldering in fellfire and choked with bodies. Narrowly, they avoided becoming victims of the war themselves. They helped Nozdormu recover the dragon soul and return it to the present. And in the last act of this final chapter, the Alliance and Horde as well as the Aspects unite behind Thrall. The defenders of Wyrmrest pursued Deathwing through the skies and slowly whittled away his strength. N'Zoth sensed that his servant was on the verge of defeat. The old god's plans were unraveling, and it made one final, desperate attempt to turn the tide. Thrall turned the dragon soul against this aberration. To ensure that it would destroy Deathwing, the dragon aspect sacrificed all the remaining power to the artifact. Their essences, combined with the element of earth that Thrall had woven into the weapon, seared through Deathwing. The explosive power annihilated his tormented mind and body. In that moment, N'Zoth's campaign to bring about the Hour of Twilight collapsed, and along with that, the end of the Cataclysm expansion. So I thought this was pretty interesting with the trading of credit between the Alliance and the Horde. So I'd love to know what you guys think in a comment. Do you think that this is an appropriate score for either of these factions? Do you disagree and think that one faction should take credit over the other for a certain instance? Let me know in a comment below. I hope you enjoyed this video and this reading because my voice is pretty darn tired. But I hope you hit that like button and subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.